Introduction. There is a quiet, often overlooked force at the heart of every meaningful transformation. It doesn't announce itself with bravado. It doesn't demand applause or attention. It simply exists, steady, unshakable, and essential. That force is self-trust. And in a world that constantly encourages us to look outward for answers, approval, and direction, self-trust may be the most radical thing we can reclaim. Self-trust is not arrogance. It's not the hollow confidence we're told to wear like armor to mask our insecurity. It's not about pretending we have all the answers or never making mistakes. Self-trust is something far deeper. It is the internal knowing that no matter what happens, you can count on yourself. It is the understanding that you are capable of navigating the unknown, of facing discomfort, and of staying rooted in your truth even when it would be easier to abandon it. It is the quiet courage to follow your own path when the world is shouting at you to take another. Most people want to grow. They want to evolve, to change their habits, to step into their potential. But something always seems to hold them back. And often, that something isn't laziness or a lack of ambition. It's a fractured relationship with themselves. If you don't trust your own voice, how can you expect to act on it? If you doubt your every instinct, how can you take bold steps toward a bigger life? Without self-trust, every risk feels like recklessness. Every failure feels like proof that you're not enough. Every decision feels like a gamble. But with self-trust, risk becomes a test of alignment, failure becomes feedback, and each decision becomes a deepening of personal integrity. Learning to trust yourself is not a one-time choice. It's a practice, a lifelong unfolding. It begins in the small moments, the times you say you'll wake up early, but don't. The moments you feel something is wrong, but override it to keep the peace. The gut feeling you have before a decision that you ignore in favor of what's popular or expected. Every time you abandon yourself in these moments, the thread of self-trust wears thinner. Eventually, it can feel as if you're living life for everyone but yourself. Numb, disconnected, disempowered. The transformation begins the moment you choose to turn inward and listen again. To hear the whispers of your inner voice and begin, slowly, to honor it. This book is about the deep, sometimes uncomfortable, but always liberating process of rebuilding that trust. It's about discovering that what you once labeled impossible was only waiting for you to believe in your own capacity to grow through it. It's about challenging the limits you've accepted, not because you lack potential, but because somewhere along the way, you forgot who you are when you are aligned with your own truth. To trust yourself is not to be fearless. It is to be willing to act, even in the presence of fear. It's to understand that the real battle is not with the world, but within your own mind. It's not about doing everything perfectly, but about showing up with integrity. Self-trust means taking ownership of your choices. It means no longer outsourcing your worth to other people's opinions, no longer waiting for permission to begin, and no longer treating yourself as the one obstacle between you and the life you want. This is not a book about blind confidence. It is not about hyping yourself up to do things you're not ready for. This is a book about earned confidence, the kind that is built by keeping your word to yourself, by doing hard things without guarantees, and by learning that failure is never the enemy if you trust yourself to rise from it. It's about courage that doesn't shout, but whispers, "I've got you," even in the dark. If you're tired of second-guessing yourself, if you feel like you're constantly waiting to feel ready, waiting to be sure, waiting for life to offer you something more, this is your call to stop waiting and start building. You don't need more external validation. You need to return to the source of power that's been with you all along. This is the journey of self-trust. And on the other side of it lies a version of you who not only believes the impossible is possible, but proves it. Chapter 1. The War Within. Why you don't trust yourself yet. Before self-trust can be reclaimed, it must first be understood why it was lost. The journey to wholeness does not begin with action. It begins with awareness. And for many, what lies beneath the surface of hesitation, avoidance, or fear isn't a lack of discipline or desire, but an ongoing internal war. This is not a war fought in the outside world. It's an invisible conflict that lives in the quiet spaces of your mind. It's the voice that talks you out of your dreams. The second-guessing, the hesitation, the persistent feeling that no matter what you do, It might not be enough. This war within is fueled by many things, but it often begins with self-doubt. Not the occasional uncertainty that comes with growth, but a deeply embedded pattern of questioning your own instincts, emotions, and judgments. It shows up when you feel something strongly, but immediately wonder if you're overreacting. When an idea excites you, but you talk yourself out of it before you begin. When you know you want something more, but convince yourself it's safer not to try. That quiet erosion of inner authority begins early, and by the time you're an adult, it can become so familiar that you no longer notice it's even happening. Overthinking often disguises itself as wisdom. It wears the mask of responsibility, caution, or intelligence. But at its root, it is often fear in disguise. When you overanalyze every decision, every emotion, every possible outcome, you paralyze your own ability to act. Instead of trusting your gut and learning through experience, you try to predict every variable in advance. The result is stagnation. You delay. You prepare. You wait for certainty that never comes. This mental spiraling slowly chips away at your confidence, creating a cycle where the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to believe in yourself. Procrastination is another symptom of fractured self-trust. It's not always laziness. In fact, it's rarely about effort at all. It's often the subconscious way you avoid confronting your own fear of inadequacy. If you don't start, you can't fail. If you delay, you never have to face the truth about whether or not you're capable. But underneath the delay is often a story. I'm not ready. What if I mess it up? I can't handle the pressure. These are not objective truths. They are inherited beliefs, often planted long before you were aware of them. And then there's the need for external validation, the longing to be told that you're doing the right thing, that you're on the right path, that you're good enough. This craving often stems from environments that taught you love had to be earned. Maybe you were only praised when you performed. Maybe you were shamed for expressing emotions, or taught to suppress your desires in order to keep the peace. Over time, you learned to outsource your sense of worth to others. You stopped asking yourself what you wanted and started measuring your value based on how well you were received. This is where the pattern of people-pleasing is born, not from kindness, but from the fear that if you disappoint others, you will be unloved, unseen, or abandoned. Perfectionism adds another layer to the inner war. It convinces you that you must be flawless in order to be worthy, that mistakes are unacceptable, that you have to prove yourself constantly in order to matter. But perfectionism is just shame dressed up as ambition. It tells you that your humanity is a liability and that you must work harder than everyone else just to be enough. Living under that kind of pressure is exhausting. And worse, it teaches you not to trust your natural rhythm, your imperfect process, or your right to learn by doing. Instead, you become trapped in the illusion that you're always falling short, always needing to improve, fix, or refine before you can simply begin. And then, sometimes, there's trauma, big or small, obvious or subtle. Trauma teaches the body and mind that the world is not safe, and neither are your own instincts. If your boundaries were violated, if your emotions were minimized, if your voice was silenced, you may have learned that trusting yourself leads to pain. As a result, you internalize a sense of hypervigilance. You scan for danger, second-guess your reactions, and abandon your needs just to feel safe. The nervous system becomes wired for survival, not growth. In this state, self-trust feels not just unfamiliar, it feels threatening. The tragedy in all of this is that most people don't even realize they're betraying themselves. They just know they feel stuck. They know they've outgrown certain habits, relationships, or versions of themselves, but can't seem to break free. They know they're capable of more, but feel haunted by hesitation. What they may not realize is that each time they say yes when they mean no, each time they silence a truth for the sake of harmony, each time they ignore the pull in their gut because it's inconvenient or scary, they're teaching themselves not to listen to their own voice. And over time, that voice gets quieter. It doesn't disappear, but it retreats, waiting for you to return. Rebuilding self-trust doesn't require dramatic change at first. It begins with noticing. Noticing when you hesitate. Noticing when your body tightens in resistance. Noticing when you override your own knowing because someone else disapproves. It begins with small moments of truth, those flickers of clarity that rise up before your mind tries to rationalize them away. The more you notice, the more you can begin to honor. And the more you honor, the more that inner voice begins to rise again. Not with force, but with quiet authority. The war within only begins to quiet when you choose to listen to yourself again. Not perfectly, not without fear, but with willingness, with presence, with the awareness that you're not broken. You are simply unpracticed in trusting your own wisdom. And like any relationship, the one you have with yourself must be repaired through patience, consistency, and honesty. Self-trust is not a switch you flip. It is a bridge you build. And the first plank is laid the moment you decide to stop abandoning yourself. The rest of this journey will walk you through how. This inner war is often a learned response. It begins when, at some point in your early life, your emotions or insights were dismissed or punished. Maybe you were told you were being dramatic, too sensitive, too selfish, too quiet, too much. Maybe your natural instincts were shut down before they could fully form. When that happens repeatedly, especially in formative years, you start to believe that your inner world cannot be trusted. You begin to look outward to know what is good, right, acceptable, or valuable. You become less of a self and more of a reflection, reacting to others, fitting in, performing roles, all while the deeper, truer you waits silently beneath the surface. People-pleasing becomes one of the most common survival strategies born out of that disconnection. You may think of just being kind, thoughtful, or supportive, but beneath those actions is often fear, the fear of being disliked, rejected, or judged. So you edit yourself. You anticipate the needs of others before your own. You say yes when every part of you is screaming no, and then you wonder why you feel invisible, tired, or resentful. It's because every time you betray your truth, a little piece of your self-trust slips away. Perfectionism feeds that same cycle of disconnection. If you've learned that love, praise, or success only come when you excel, you start to believe that being human, messy, uncertain, emotional, is dangerous. You hold yourself to impossible standards. You delay starting until everything is flawless. You criticize yourself before others can. And while this drive might bring moments of external validation, it robs you of the internal peace that comes from self-acceptance. It keeps you performing instead of living. Overthinking, too, is a symptom of this war. It gives you the illusion of control. If you can just think long and hard enough, you might avoid pain, make the perfect choice, protect yourself from failure. But what really happens is paralysis. You get stuck in the loop of doubt, weighing every possibility, analyzing every detail, fearing the consequences of a misstep. But no amount of thought can substitute for self-trust. Eventually, action must be taken. And it is in that leap, messy, uncertain, imperfect, that self-trust is forged. Self-doubt often masquerades as humility, but it's actually a defense mechanism. It keeps you from rising. It keeps you small under the guise of caution. It tells you to wait until you're ready, until you're better, until you have more proof. But that day never comes. Because readiness doesn't come before the leap, it comes from the leap. Confidence doesn't precede action, it grows from it. The deeper truth is this: you won't feel fully ready to trust yourself until you begin trusting yourself. It's a loop that can only be broken by courage. There's another layer to this war, one that's harder to name. It's the part of you that has been so let down, so abandoned, so deeply hurt by others or by life itself, that you learn to mistrust even your own joy. Every time you got your hopes up and were disappointed, your system learned to shut down hope. Every time you gave your heart and were met with betrayal, your system learned to protect you from connection. So now, even when something feels good, aligned, or deeply right, there's a voice that whispers, "Don't trust this. Don't open up. Don't let go. This is not your fault. This is not weakness. This is your body doing its best to shield you from pain." But Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." You cannot build self-trust without first making conscious the ways in which you have been taught to doubt yourself. The work of healing begins with honesty. You must be willing to see the moments when you override your instincts, The times you silence yourself to fit in, the patterns you repeat, even when they drain you. This is not about blame. This is about reclaiming power. Because once you can see where the thread was broken, you can begin the work of weaving it back together. In these early stages, you are not asked to make huge leaps or drastic changes. You are asked to notice, to be present, to recognize the inner war not as your identity, but as a protective response to pain, rejection, or fear. Every time you choose presence over pattern, every time you choose honesty over hiding, every time you choose to follow that quiet voice within instead of the noise outside, you are reclaiming lost territory within yourself. You will not win the war all at once, but you will begin to disarm it, piece by piece, each time you choose yourself. And eventually, what was once a battleground becomes sacred ground, a place where trust, courage, and self-respect can take root again. This is where everything begins, not with a flawless plan or a fearless leap, but with a simple, powerful decision to stop abandoning yourself and start listening again. That decision changes everything. Chapter 2. Reclaiming Inner Authority. There comes a moment in every journey of self-trust when you realize that no one is coming to save you, and that this is not a tragedy, but a turning point. It's the moment when you understand that waiting for permission, clarity, or validation from the outside world is the very thing keeping you stuck. This realization can be jarring, but also deeply liberating, because once you see it, you can begin the work of reclaiming what was always yours, your inner authority. Reclaiming inner authority means stepping back into the driver's seat of your life. It's about choosing to own your thoughts, your decisions, your emotions, and your direction. It means no longer outsourcing your sense of certainty to other people's opinions, trends, systems, or expectations. It means asking yourself what you think, how you feel, and what you want, and then daring to act on that truth, even when it's uncomfortable, unfamiliar, or misunderstood. True self-trust cannot grow in the absence of ownership. As long as you believe that someone else knows better than you about your own life, you will always be standing on shaky ground. But reclaiming inner authority isn't about becoming rigid or self-righteous. It's not about cutting yourself off from feedback or ignoring wisdom from others. It's about discernment. It's about learning to hear the many voices around you, and then tuning into your own voice and recognizing it as the final authority. That voice, your inner knowing, is always present, but it often becomes muted beneath layers of doubt, fear, noise, and conditioning. The key is learning to distinguish that voice from the reactive noise of impulse or emotion. Intuition is calm. It speaks softly. It doesn't push or panic. It simply knows. When you're in touch with your intuition, there's a sense of clarity, even if your choice feels risky. You may not have all the logical reasons why, but something within you aligns, settles, resonates. Impulse, on the other hand, is urgent. It demands immediate action. It thrives on emotional highs and lows. It often feels like a spike of energy, anger, excitement, anxiety, followed by a crash or regret. Learning to tell the difference between impulse and intuition is one of the most powerful ways to strengthen your inner authority. This discernment takes practice. One of the simplest and most profound ways to begin is through journaling. When you write without a filter, stream of consciousness, raw and uncensored, you begin to see the layers of your thoughts and feelings more clearly. You can begin to track patterns, uncover buried truths, and distinguish between your voice and the voices you've inherited. Journaling is not about perfection or performance. It's about witnessing yourself honestly. Over time, it helps you build a deeper relationship with your own truth. Mindfulness is another essential practice in reclaiming your inner authority. When you are constantly reacting to life, chasing distractions, avoiding discomfort, numbing your emotions, you lose connection with your center. Mindfulness brings you back. It teaches you how to be present with what is, without immediately needing to change it, fix it, or judge it. When you learn to sit with yourself in stillness, even for a few minutes a day, you begin to hear the subtle whispers of your inner guidance. You learn that discomfort is not danger. You learn to respond rather than react. You learn to trust the wisdom that arises in stillness, not just the voices that shout in urgency. Boundaries also play a crucial role in rebuilding inner authority. When your energy is constantly entangled with the expectations, needs, or emotions of others, it becomes nearly impossible to hear your own voice. Setting boundaries isn't just about protecting your time or space. It's about protecting your clarity. It's about choosing to honor what is true for you, even when others don't understand it. Every time you say no to something that drains you, every time you step back from a dynamic that disrespects you, you reinforce to yourself that your needs matter, your instincts are valid, and your well-being is worth protecting. Making decisions without relying on external approval is one of the most direct ways to step into your power. This doesn't mean being reckless or ignoring wise counsel, but it does mean recognizing when you've become dependent on others to affirm what you already know. It means choosing to move forward even when others aren't cheering you on. It means recognizing that clarity is not always collective, that sometimes you're the only one who sees what you see, and you must honor it anyway. With every decision you make from your inner authority, even if it feels small, you send a message to your subconscious. I trust you. I've got this. Rebuilding this kind of self-trust doesn't happen overnight. It requires discipline. The discipline to listen to yourself, even when it would be easier to avoid. It requires consistency. The consistency to follow through on what you say matters, even when motivation fades. Each time you honor your word to yourself, you reinforce the foundation of inner trust. Each time you follow through on a commitment, even when no one is watching, you strengthen the muscle of self-respect. And when you fall short, and you will, it's not about shame or punishment. It's about noticing, learning, and returning to yourself without judgment. Reclaiming inner authority is not a one-time act. It's a daily devotion. It's the way you begin to relate to yourself with reverence rather than resentment, with curiosity rather than criticism. It's the moment you stop waiting for the world to approve of your choices and begin living in a way that feels honest, aligned, and free. You are not meant to be led by fear, conditioned patterns, or external control. You are meant to live from the inside out. And as you begin to trust your own vision, your own rhythm, your own timing, you begin to remember what it feels like to belong fully to yourself. That's where freedom begins, not in being fearless, but in being faithful to your own truth, no matter how softly it speaks. Reclaiming inner authority also means facing the parts of yourself that you've hidden, dismissed, or silenced to keep the peace or stay in control. It's about turning inward and being radically honest, not just about what you want, but about what you've been afraid to want. Because deep down, many people fear the power that comes with living as their full, expressed selves. To claim that kind of responsibility, to say, this is my life, and I choose its direction, is not only liberating, it's terrifying. There's no one left to blame, no one else to follow, no more excuses to hide behind. There is just you, and the life you are actively choosing to create or avoid every single day. When you reclaim inner authority, you begin to see how much of your life has been shaped by unconscious agreement. You agree to be small to make others comfortable. You agreed to defer your dreams until it was more convenient. You agreed to stay quiet when you knew something was wrong. But agreements can be rewritten. The moment you become aware of them, you have the power to revoke them. You don't owe anyone the version of you they feel most comfortable with. You owe yourself the freedom to become who you truly are. This reclamation is subtle at first. It starts in moments that are easy to miss. The way you speak to yourself when you make a mistake. The space you give yourself to feel an emotion instead of pushing it away. The way you pause and check in with your body before saying yes. These are the quiet revolutions. These are the moments when you stop letting life pull you in 100 different directions and start pulling yourself inward, back to your own center. One of the most transformative aspects of reclaiming inner authority is realizing that you don't need to have all the answers to move forward. You just need to decide that your life belongs to you. Clarity doesn't always arrive before action. Often, it arrives through action, through the willingness to step even when the path is unclear, trusting that your next step will be revealed by taking the first. That's how intuition works. It doesn't light the entire road. It lights the space in front of your feet. But when you follow it, step by step, you find yourself in places your old logic never could have led you. There's a profound shift that happens when you begin to live from this place. You stop measuring your worth by how well you perform for others. You stop bending to fit expectations that were never yours to begin with. You begin to walk through the world with a quiet, unshakable energy. Not loud, not defensive, just grounded. You're no longer trying to prove anything, fix yourself, or win approval. You're simply choosing to honor the truth of who you are every day in the way you think, speak, act, and decide. Inner authority doesn't make life easier, but it makes it real. It makes it yours. And it offers a kind of peace that nothing outside of you ever could. Because when you trust yourself, when you live in integrity with your own values and desires, you no longer need to control every outcome. You know that even when life throws you into the unknown, you will meet yourself there with honesty and strength. You will not abandon yourself again. From here on, your power lies in presence, in listening, in choosing, not once, but over and over, not for others, but for you. And every time you do, every time you choose your own voice over the noise, your inner authority grows stronger. It becomes a compass, a sanctuary, a home you return to, no matter where the world takes you. This is the foundation of self-trust, not certainty, not perfection, but the commitment to keep coming back to yourself, again and again, until the path you walk becomes unmistakably your own. Chapter 3. Challenging the edge, stepping into the impossible. There comes a point in the journey where knowing yourself is no longer enough. You can journal every day, meditate for hours, analyze your patterns, and speak the language of healing fluently. But until you act, until you step into something that scares you, the transformation remains theoretical. Real self-trust is not built in comfort. It is not built in perfect conditions. It is forged in the fire of experience, especially in the moments when you stretch beyond what you thought you were capable of. It is in these moments that you begin to redefine what's possible. The edge, the place just beyond your current capacity, identity, or comfort zone, is where the impossible begins to dissolve. Not because the impossible becomes easy, but because it becomes real. The impossible is only impossible until someone does it. And for you, that someone is you. But the truth is, most people never approach their edge. They build entire lives around avoiding it. They stay in familiar relationships, familiar routines, familiar patterns of playing small, because the unknown feels too risky. The irony is that the edge is not the danger. It's the threshold to your next self. Stretching yourself is not about overextending. It's not about pushing to burnout or chasing goals that aren't even yours. It's about choosing to enter spaces where you are no longer sure of the outcome. It's about doing something that activates fear, resistance, or vulnerability, not to punish yourself, but to expand your capacity. This stretch could be anything. Speaking publicly when you've always stayed silent, starting a business that aligns with your values, saying no for the first time without apology, writing the book that terrifies you, letting yourself be seen in love or creativity. These aren't just actions, they're thresholds. They demand that you meet a version of yourself you haven't fully embodied yet. Self-trust becomes real at this edge, because here, you're no longer working from memory or inherited belief. You're stepping into uncertainty. You're walking without a map. You're moving forward not because you know exactly how it will turn out, but because you know you're meant to try. This is where the fear of failure, rejection, or embarrassment gets louder. And this is also where courage is born. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move with it. When you can show up in the presence of fear and still take the next step, you teach yourself something powerful. You are safe with yourself, even in discomfort. It's easy to romanticize success, but the truth is, most people who achieve the extraordinary didn't get there because they were the most talented or the most prepared. They got there because they were willing to risk failure in service of something meaningful. They trusted themselves enough to be seen trying. They didn't wait until they were completely ready, confident, or qualified. They began. They stumbled. They learned. They adapted. They kept going. Consider the artist who decides to share her work after years of hiding it. She doesn't feel ready. She doubts the quality of her expression. She fears judgment. But one day, she shares a piece, not for approval, but as an act of self-honoring. The reaction doesn't matter as much as the fact that she crossed the threshold. In doing so, she breaks the agreement that says she must remain unseen. The edge she challenged wasn't the world's, it was her own. In that moment, she reclaims power not by succeeding, but by showing up in truth. Or imagine the man who has always chosen safety, stable job, predictable choices, emotional detachment. He wakes up one day and realizes that his life is filled with everything but aliveness. He wants more, but doesn't know where to begin. He begins with a difficult conversation, with his partner, with himself, with the life he has quietly outgrown. It doesn't go perfectly. It isn't wrapped in clarity, but it's real. It's a beginning. And for the first time in years, he feels like he's actually living. That feeling doesn't come from control. It comes from courage. These moments may seem small from the outside, but they are seismic within. They shift the way you see yourself. They prove to your nervous system that you can do hard things and survive. They become new reference points, rewriting the stories that once told you to stay hidden, quiet, or safe. The more you step into these edges, the more the impossible becomes not a fixed barrier, but a moving frontier, something that changes shape every time you rise. But this journey doesn't come without resistance. As you begin to challenge your edges, the parts of you that were built to protect you will fight back. The inner critic will get louder. The old stories will resurface. The temptation to return to the known will grow strong. This is not failure. This is the natural backlash of expansion. Growth often comes with grief, the grief of letting go of who you were, how you coped, what you believed. Trusting yourself enough to endure that discomfort is what makes the transformation lasting. Discomfort is the price of freedom. It is the toll we pay for liberation. And the more you build the capacity to sit with discomfort, to breathe through it, to stay present in it, the more expansive your life becomes. Eventually, what once felt impossible will become your new normal. You'll look back and see that the edge you once feared was never a wall. It was a doorway. And on the other side of it was not perfection, not certainty, but possibility. You don't need to leap into the unknown with reckless abandon. You don't need to prove anything. You simply need to choose the next stretch, the one that feels honest, the one that asks for your courage. And then take the first step, not because it's safe, not because it's easy, but because you are ready to meet a part of yourself that only reveals itself when you dare to grow. This is how the impossible is done, not all at once, but through 1,000 small acts of courage, through showing up when it would be easier to hide, through trusting your voice when it shakes, through standing at the edge of everything familiar, taking a breath, and saying yes. There is something sacred about the moment just before the leap, the space between knowing you can no longer stay where you are and not yet knowing where you'll land. It's the quiet before everything changes. For most, this space feels unbearable. The mind scrambles for guarantees. The heart aches for reassurance. The body resists the uncertainty. And yet, this exact moment, this fragile, terrifying in-between, is where you come alive. It's where the impossible begins to dissolve, not because you conquered it, but because you had the courage to move toward it anyway. What's often labeled as impossible is rarely beyond reach. It's just untested. It's a version of life you haven't allowed yourself to experience because of fear, shame, doubt, or conditioning. You haven't stepped into it, not because you can't, but because you've never been taught to trust yourself enough to try. Somewhere along the way, you were taught that failure is something to be avoided at all costs, that it defines your worth, that it proves you weren't good enough, smart enough, strong enough. But what if failure is the portal? What if failing isn't the end of the story, but the beginning of your becoming? You cannot grow without failing. You cannot stretch without risking discomfort. The fear of rejection, of looking foolish, of getting it wrong. These are the emotional thresholds you must learn to walk through if you want to reach the other side of your potential. Avoiding them may keep you safe, but it will never make you whole. True self-trust is not built by staying comfortable. It's built by standing inside your fear and choosing not to run. It's built by being willing to fall and still show up again tomorrow. It's built by realizing that your identity does not shatter when you stumble. It expands. Some of the most extraordinary people began with nothing more than a willingness to act in the presence of doubt. Think of the woman who, for years, was too afraid to share her voice because of a childhood spent being silenced. One day, she attends a local open mic night. She doesn't feel ready, but she goes anyway. She reads a poem, voice trembling, heart pounding. The room is quiet. Then someone claps. Then another. And in that moment, something shifts. Not because she performed flawlessly, but because she crossed the invisible barrier between fear and freedom. Or the man who spent a decade in a career that slowly drained him. He had dreams of starting a business that aligned with his values, but he told himself it wasn't the right time. He waited. For security. For clarity. For signs. Until one day, the pain of staying became greater than the fear of leaving. He took a step. Resigned, planned, stumbled, adjusted. The first year was hard, but with each small decision, he became more of himself. And now, years later, he doesn't speak of how difficult it was. He speaks of how alive he finally feels. These stories are not rare. They are happening around you and within you. Every person who reclaims their power does so by challenging their own edge. The specifics may change, but the process remains the same. Feel the fear, hear the doubt, and act anyway. That action is your declaration of belief. Not that you will succeed, but that you are worthy of trying. To live in this way is to become deeply intimate with risk. Not the kind that threatens your safety, but the kind that threatens your ego. The kind that strips away the illusion of control and asks you to show up as you are. When you challenge your edge, you meet your real self, the one not defined by past failures, societal roles, or other people's projections. You meet the version of you who is still curious, still open, still reaching. And it's important to remember that this path is not linear. You will stretch and shrink. You will leap and retreat. You will doubt and then believe again. This is not regression. It's rhythm. Self-trust doesn't mean you never feel fear. It means you've stopped letting fear decide your life. You've made a deeper vow that you will keep growing, keep trying, keep showing up, even when it's messy, even when it's hard. Each time you do, the edge moves. What once felt impossible now feels inevitable. You begin to look back and realize that the person you used to be wouldn't have recognized the life you now live. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You expanded your capacity. You stopped waiting for certainty. You stopped asking for permission. You chose to believe that the version of life you dreamed of wasn't a fantasy. It was a calling. Chapter 4. Becoming your own evidence. The most powerful kind of confidence is not given to you. It is not handed down, taught, or granted by the approval of others. It is built, moment by moment, decision by decision, from the inside out. You do not need to wait for life to prove that you're capable, worthy, or ready. You need to become your own evidence. And that means choosing every day to act in alignment with what you know is true for you. Even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's inconvenient, even if no one else sees the work you're doing behind the scenes. Transformation doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds quietly, through repeated moments of courage. A small, brave step today becomes the momentum that carries you into tomorrow. And when you string together enough of those moments, when you show up again and again, despite the fear, despite the setbacks, you begin to change not just what you do, but who you believe yourself to be. The person who once hesitated becomes the person who follows through. The person who once needed permission becomes the person who leads themselves. The impossible things that once felt so far away now sit within reach. Not because the world became easier, but because you became more willing to meet it as you are. Each time you act on what you say matters to you. Even in a small way, you plant a seed of self-trust. Following through on a morning routine, speaking your truth in a hard conversation, showing up to create when inspiration is absent, choosing rest without guilt, or choosing effort without expectation. These are not insignificant acts. These are the daily rituals of someone building belief. When you honor your word to yourself, you're not just achieving a task. You're creating a new emotional blueprint. One that says, I am someone who shows up for what matters. I can count on me. This is where the definition of success must shift. Because if success only means achieving the perfect outcome, you will always live in a state of chasing and never arriving. The external result is only one part of the equation, and often the least reliable part. What if success isn't about the outcome at all, but about the alignment? What if the real win is that you didn't abandon yourself. That you took the risk, stayed the course, honored your process, and showed up in integrity with your truth. When you measure success this way, you are never without reason to be proud. You stop living in reaction to what others validate and start living in devotion to what you value. There is profound power in celebrating inner milestones. Not just the big wins, but the quiet victories. The days you kept going when it would have been easier to quit. The nights you chose reflection over distraction. The decisions you made that no one else saw, but that honored your healing, your goals, your future self. These are not small things. These are the foundations of lasting transformation. Because no external recognition can replace the kind of self-respect that comes from knowing you didn't back down from your own life. And the beauty of this process is that it builds on itself. The more you follow through, the more capable you feel. The more capable you feel, the more likely you are to try again. Each step reinforces the next. Eventually, the things that once felt impossible become familiar terrain. Not because they're easy, but because you've expanded. Your threshold has shifted. Your self-concept has evolved. You're no longer waiting to become someone else. You're proving, through action, that you already are becoming the person you once doubted you could be. But there will be days when it feels like you're making no progress. Days when the effort feels invisible. Days when your inner critic is louder than your inner cheerleader. These are the days that matter most. Because these are the days when belief is truly built. Not by what you feel, but by what you choose. When you keep a promise to yourself, even when no part of you feels like it, you are making a statement far more powerful than any external affirmation could ever offer. You are saying, I trust me. I don't need to feel perfect to act in alignment with my purpose. You do not need to transform your entire life in a single leap. You only need to take the next aligned step, then the next, then the next. This is how momentum is born, not from intensity, but from consistency. It's the act of walking your talk when no one is watching, of doing the thing you said you would do, not for applause, but because you know who you're becoming. And every time you do, you add another thread to the fabric of your identity. You become less someone hoping to change, and more someone living as change in motion. You are not just dreaming, you are becoming. And that process, rooted in self-alignment, repeated action, and inner celebration, is the evidence that you're already doing what once seemed impossible. You no longer need to wait for someone else to tell you what is real. You can feel it. You are building it. And step by step, you are becoming undeniable. Not because of how loudly you speak, but because of how quietly you keep showing up. There is something profoundly transformative that happens when you no longer need to convince yourself of your worth, because your actions already reflect it. You don't need to hype yourself up or overcompensate with intensity. You got proof. You've got lived, embodied experience of rising, even in moments of doubt. You've got your own evidence. And that's a different kind of power, a quiet, grounded confidence that doesn't waver with external results because it's rooted in something far deeper, the relationship you've built with yourself through action. When you become your own evidence, you stop outsourcing your identity to outcomes. You stop needing to achieve something spectacular to feel valid. Instead, you begin to recognize the spectacular in showing up, in honoring the decision to keep moving, keep choosing, keep becoming, even when the metrics of progress aren't obvious. You start to understand that growth is not always measured in milestones. Sometimes it's measured in micro moments. The pause before a reactive thought, the breath taken before a bold truth, the inner shift from avoidance to engagement. These internal shifts build muscle, and the more often you access them, the more stable your foundation becomes. You start to believe in your ability to do hard things, not because you're superhuman, but because you've done hard things before. You've said no when it mattered. You've taken the leap with no safety net. You've held your ground when everything in you wanted to disappear. That history becomes your strength. It becomes a narrative you can lean into in moments of future uncertainty. Because you know now, through experience, not theory, that you can trust yourself to walk through discomfort and come out clearer, stronger, and more honest on the other side. This is how self-trust compounds. It builds like interest in an account you continue to invest in. Each time you show up, you deposit belief. Each time you honor a boundary, you strengthen clarity. Each time you act with integrity, you expand your emotional range. Over time, these deposits become a reserve of self-respect you can draw on in difficult times. And when doubt creeps in, as it inevitably will, you'll have something solid to return to, the undeniable truth that you've shown up before, and you will again. What you're doing, moment by moment, is rewriting the story you've told yourself about who you are. No longer the one who always gives up. No longer the one who plays small, who waits for permission, who hesitates in the shadow of fear. You are becoming the one who tries, the one who dares, the one who keeps going, not because everything is certain, but because you've made a promise to yourself to live fully, honestly, and freely. And what happens when you live like that, when you consistently become your own evidence, is that the impossible starts to feel personal. It's no longer a distant dream or a vague aspiration. It's a reflection of your capacity. You begin to look at your life and think, if I've come this far by showing up as I am, imagine what else is possible. That's not fantasy. That's the natural progression of courage. When you live in alignment with your values, when you follow through on what you said you'd do, when you build a track record of trust with yourself, the extraordinary no longer feels mythical. It feels next. But this process doesn't demand perfection. You will miss days. You will fall short. You will break promises to yourself. That's not failure. It's feedback. The work is not to avoid every misstep, but to return, to recommit, to remind yourself that one mistake doesn't erase your progress. One misstep doesn't invalidate your direction. What matters most is the willingness to keep showing up, not as someone who never falters, but as someone who always returns. Chapter 5. Living Beyond Limits. There's a turning point in every journey where what once felt distant becomes embodied, where the struggle to prove yourself quiets, and something deeper takes its place. It's not loud. It's not flashy. It's not the result of applause, validation, or even success in the conventional sense. It's the quiet, grounded clarity that comes when you've walked through fear, challenged your edge, kept promises to yourself, and realized that you are no longer waiting. You're living. This is what it means to live beyond limits. Not a life without obstacles, but a life where your internal limits no longer define your external reality. A life where the boundaries that once held you back, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough, no longer hold power over you. You face them. You've stretched through them. And in the process, you've discovered that radical self-trust is not just a mindset. It's a way of being. When you begin to live from deep internal alignment, everything changes. Decisions become simpler, not because life becomes predictable, but because your compass is internal, not external. You stop needing the world to approve, and you start choosing from a place of grounded truth. You stop deferring to the timelines or rules of others and begin honoring your own pace, your own rhythm, your own vision. This doesn't mean you always know where you're going. It means you trust yourself enough to move forward anyway. The emotional and spiritual reward of self-trust is peace. Not the peace that comes from perfect circumstances, but the peace that comes from integrity. When your thoughts, words, and actions align, something clicks in a place within you. You feel settled, whole, connected to yourself in a way that no achievement, relationship, or external outcome could ever offer. You don't just feel capable, you feel alive. And that aliveness spills into every corner of your life. In relationships, it allows you to show up with clarity and authenticity. You no longer perform or shrink to be loved. You let yourself be seen as you are. You stop chasing connection through compromise and start building connection through truth. You love without losing yourself. You listen without abandoning your voice. And in doing so, you create relationships that are rooted in mutual respect, not silent self-betrayal. In leadership, self-trust makes you magnetic. People can feel when someone is leading from alignment rather than ego. When you trust yourself, you don't need to dominate or control. You create space. You inspire through presence. You model courage by showing that you don't have all the answers, but you're willing to move anyway. And that kind of leadership, grounded, honest, human, is what the world needs most. In creativity, self-trust is freedom. You stop creating to be liked and start creating to be true. You write the words that matter, paint the pictures that haunt you, Build the thing that won't leave you alone. Not because it's guaranteed to succeed, but because it's yours. You no longer censor yourself to meet expectations. You create from the fire within, not the pressure outside. And in doing so, your work carries energy, power, life. In resilience, self-trust is your anchor. Life will still bring uncertainty. It will still bring loss, chaos, doubt. But when you trust yourself, you stop crumbling at the first sign of discomfort. You've built a foundation that holds. You know how to return to yourself. You know how to breathe through the storm. You've proven, time and time again, that you don't abandon your truth, no matter what. That kind of resilience isn't reactive. It's rooted. And it gives you the strength to keep rising again and again. All of this begins when you stop waiting for the right moment. The perfect plan. The version of you that feels more confident, more ready, more deserving. You stop postponing your life until you feel qualified to live it. You stop looking for signs to tell you it's time, and you become the sign. You decide that now is enough. That this moment, imperfect and unpolished, is the place where change begins. That you are the one you've been waiting for. To trust yourself is to reclaim your life from fear, from conditioning, from silence. It's to live not as a shadow of someone else's vision, but as the fullest expression of your own. It's to remember that you are not here to merely survive or succeed by the world's standards. You are here to create, to connect, to feel deeply, to love honestly, to lead with heart, and to live with unshakable presence. This is not a one-time decision. It is a way of being. It is a daily choice, a devotion, but it is the only path that leads to a life that is truly yours. Not curated, not copied, yours. Living beyond limits is not about becoming invincible. It's about becoming deeply human in a way that feels liberated, honest, and complete. It's about standing in the truth of who you are, without armor, without apology, and choosing to participate in life with your full presence. It's not about escaping fear or pain. It's about no longer letting fear or pain dictate the direction of your life. When you trust yourself, you no longer avoid life's edges. You meet them. You breathe through them. You learn from them. And because of that, you grow in ways that are profound, irreversible, and deeply personal. You begin to move differently in the world. Not faster, not louder, but with a certain kind of quiet certainty. The kind of certainty that comes from knowing you're no longer pretending. You're no longer chasing someone else's version of success or seeking worth through performance. You're here, rooted in your own center, allowing your life to unfold through intention instead of reaction. That shift, though invisible to many, changes everything. It brings peace to your choices, clarity to your relationships, and presence to your work. You start to notice how much noise you've been filtering out, noise that used to control you. The opinions, the comparisons, the doubt, the expectations. With self-trust, that noise becomes background static rather than the main voice in your head. You don't need to prove yourself through constant striving. You don't need to explain your choices to people who were never meant to understand them. You become your own reference point, your own guide, your own permission. There's a softness that grows in people who trust themselves, a softness that's not weakness, but wisdom. You begin to forgive yourself more quickly, to honor your emotional landscape without getting stuck in it, to respond rather than react. You learn to pause, to listen, to choose. And in that space between stimulus and response, you reclaim your power again and again. That's the beauty of self-trust. It gives you back to yourself. It's not only your life that begins to shift. Your presence becomes a mirror for others. When you embody what it means to live beyond fear, beyond delay, beyond pretense, you show others what's possible. You give them permission, not by instructing them, but by being an example of someone who lives with inner alignment. That's the deepest kind of leadership, and it requires nothing but authenticity. In your relationships, you stop seeking to be completed and start showing up whole. You're no longer looking for someone to tell you who you are or how to feel. You are already anchored in your truth, and from that place, you love more cleanly, more freely, more honestly. You're not afraid to be seen, because you've already seen yourself. You're not afraid to be alone, because you've already come home to yourself. And when two people with that kind of self-trust meet, What's created is not dependency, it's devotion. In your creative life, you stop hesitating. You stop editing yourself into palatability. You write what aches to be written. You build what demands to be built. You speak what burns to be spoken. You stop performing and start expressing. You realize that your voice is not something to be proven. It's something to be honored. And whether the world applauds or not, you continue, because creativity, for you, has become a sacred act of self-trust. In your work, you lead with authenticity, not authority. People listen to you not because you're perfect, but because you are real, because your leadership comes from embodiment, not theory. You've walked the path. You've wrestled with doubt. You've dared greatly. And now your words and actions are woven together in a way that people can feel. You become the kind of leader who doesn't just speak a possibility, but lives it. And through it all, you stop waiting for the perfect conditions. You stop saying one day and start saying now. You stop asking if you're good enough and start asking what's worth doing. You become someone who moves, not recklessly, but intentionally. Someone who honors the value of this one life, not by rushing through it, but by rising fully within it. Because when you trust yourself, you no longer negotiate your dreams with your fear. You understand that the future is not something you arrive at. It's something you shape, moment by moment, by how willing you are to be present, brave, and aligned with your inner knowing. This is the essence of living beyond limits. Not limitless in what you do, but limitless in who you're willing to become. And what you become, when you truly trust yourself, is someone who no longer doubts their power to create, to contribute, to love, to rise, and to thrive. Not because everything becomes easy, but because you've become unshakably aligned with what matters most.